The air inside the little bakery smelled of freshly baked bread, vanilla frosting, and powdered sugar. The place was small, warm and busy that Saturday morning, filled with the sound of quiet chatter, the hum of the coffee machine, and the soft scrape of chairs against the floor. In the middle of it all stood Emily Dawson, her heart pounding as she tried to steady her shaking hands. Her fingers gripped the edges of her old brown wallet like it might somehow stretch itself and give her what she didn't have. Across the glass counter, the small chocolate cake sat waiting, perfect, simple, with blue frosting around the edges and white icing that spelled out "Happy Birthday, Noah." It was nothing fancy, but it was everything her little boy had wished for all week. Noah stood beside her, his tiny hands resting on the counter, his face glowing with pure excitement. His blonde hair stuck out from under his knit beanie, his front tooth slightly missing, giving him the kind of smile that could make anyone's day brighter. He was turning 7 today, and for the past month, he had been talking about nothing but his birthday cake. Not toys, not gifts, just a cake with his name on it. It broke Emily's heart to know that even this small dream might slip through her fingers. The cashier, a young woman with kind brown eyes, smiled patiently as Emily began to count out her money. The coins clinked softly on the counter, followed by a few crumpled bills. "That'll be $38.42, the cashier said cheerfully, but Emily's stomach twisted at the number. She already knew she didn't have enough before she even finished counting. Her palms grew damp. She glanced at Noah, then back at the money. $26 and some change. That was it. She had been so sure she could make it work, had planned every penny of her paycheck from the diner, until the electric bill came in higher than usual, and the bus fare increased again. Her throat tightened, and for a second, she thought she might cry right there in front of everyone. She quickly blinked the tears back, forcing herself to smile so Noah wouldn't see. "Mom, can we still get the candles?" Noah asked softly, his eyes full of hope. Maybe the ones shaped like stars. His small voice made her heart ache. "We'll see, sweetheart," she said with a smile that felt too heavy to keep up. Behind her, the line had started to grow. People shuffled impatiently, some checking their phones, others pretending not to notice. But she could feel their glances anyway, the quiet judgment that came with pity. She hated that feeling, the helplessness that clung to her whenever life reminded her that she was alone. Being a single mother wasn't supposed to be this hard, at least not forever. But between 2 part-time jobs, the bills, and taking care of Noah, she was always one step behind. She turned back to the cashier, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry, can you please hold the cake for me? I'll come back later today." She forced herself to say it calmly, to make it sound like it wasn't a big deal, but the way the cashier's expression softened told her it was obvious. "Of course," the woman replied gently. "We'll keep it here for you." Noah looked up at her with wide eyes, trying to understand. "It's okay, Mom," he said suddenly, his little hand tugging at her sleeve. "We can just make cupcakes at home. You make the best ones." His words were so simple, so innocent, and yet they shattered her inside. She managed a small laugh, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. But the truth was, she had no flour, no sugar, and barely enough milk at home to last the week. As she gathered her money back into her wallet, a low, steady voice broke through the air behind her. "Add the cake to my order," it said. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough calm authority to make everyone turn. Emily froze. For a moment she thought she had misheard. She turned slightly and found herself looking at a man standing a few feet behind her in line. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp black suit that looked like it didn't belong anywhere near this cozy neighborhood bakery. His posture was confident, composed, like he was used to people paying attention when he spoke. He held a phone in one hand and a sleek black credit card in the other. "Excuse me," Emily said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up from his phone, his blue-gray eyes meeting hers with an expression that was neither pity nor arrogance, just something unreadable, calm, but certain. "I said add the cake to my order," he repeated to the cashier. "I'll take care of it." The cashier blinked in surprise. "Are you sure, sir?" "Yes," he replied, handing her the card. "Every kid deserves a birthday cake." For a second, the whole bakery seemed to go silent. Emily's mind spun. She wanted to speak, to protest, but the words tangled in her throat. "Sir, no, that's really not necessary," she finally managed. "I can't let you," he gave a faint, polite smile. "Then consider it a gift for him," he said, nodding toward Noah. "No strings attached." Noah looked between his mother and the stranger, his eyes wide with wonder. "Really?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. The man crouched slightly so he was at eye level with the boy. "Really," he said. "I think birthdays should always have cake, don't you?" Noah grinned from ear to ear. "Thank you, mister." The man nodded, standing back up as the cashier handed the box to Emily. She accepted it slowly, her fingers brushing the smooth cardboard as if afraid it might disappear. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to," he replied simply. "Just enjoy the day." And just like that, he turned back to the counter to place his own order, as if he hadn't just changed the entire rhythm of her morning. Emily stood there for a long moment, still dazed, clutching the cake box close to her chest. She could feel her heart racing, not just from relief but from something else she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also curiosity. Who was this man? There was something about the way he carried himself. The confidence that came so effortlessly. He wasn't just anyone. When she finally found her voice again, she turned to thank him once more, but he was gone. The door's little bell jingled softly as it closed behind him, leaving her standing there with her son, her eyes fixed on the spot where he had been. It all felt like a dream, one of those fleeting moments that make you believe in goodness again, even if just for a while. Outside, the winter air was sharp and bright. Emily and Noah walked hand in hand down the street, the cake balanced carefully in her arms. She could feel Noah's joy radiating beside her, his excitement bubbling as he talked about blowing out candles and making wishes. She smiled at him, but part of her mind was still in that bakery, still hearing that quiet voice and seeing those steady eyes. She didn't know it then, but that small act of kindness from a stranger, a man with a black card and an unreadable expression, was not an accident. It was the first ripple in a wave that would soon crash into her world and change everything she thought she knew about love, luck, and fate. Alexander Carter never planned to be there that morning. His days were carefully structured, every hour mapped out by his assistant and every meeting tailored to his billion-dollar empire. He didn't have time for distractions, and he certainly didn't spend his mornings waiting in line at a small bakery in a quiet neighborhood. But that day he had canceled a meeting at the last moment, restless in a way he couldn't explain. His driver had suggested a new cafe for coffee, but Alexander had told him to stop at the corner bakery instead, the kind with fogged-up windows and hand-painted signs. Something about the simplicity of it, the kind of life untouched by luxury, had called to him. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe fate. He hadn't yet decided. When he stepped inside, the warmth of the shop had surprised him. He wasn't used to the scent of sugar and cinnamon replacing the sterile air of boardrooms and glass offices. He ordered his coffee and stood quietly, his tall frame easily noticeable among the crowd. He was used to people recognizing him, whispering his name and pretending not to stare. The tabloids often called him cold, unreachable, the billionaire who built an empire from nothing and learned to trust no one. But in truth, Alexander Carter wasn't cruel. He was just tired. Tired of empty smiles, of people wanting things from him, of everything in his life being a transaction. As he waited for his order, his attention was drawn to the front of the line. A woman was speaking softly to the cashier, her voice shaky but polite. Something about her tone made him look up. She was small, wrapped in a worn gray coat that had seen better days, her hair tied back loosely, a few strands falling into her face. Beside her stood a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, holding onto the counter with both hands and staring at a chocolate cake behind the glass like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Alexander's gaze lingered longer than he intended. He saw the way the woman counted out her money carefully, how her shoulders tensed when she realized it wasn't enough. He had seen that look before, the quiet panic of someone trying not to crumble in public. He didn't know why, but something inside him tightened. He had grown up seeing his mother wear that same expression, back when she worked double shifts to keep their small apartment running, before his father left, before the money came, before everything changed. He watched as the woman apologized to the cashier, her voice breaking slightly. The boy tugged at her sleeve, whispering something that made her force a smile. Alexander felt a strange pull in his chest. He could have looked away. He should have, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward when she began to turn away, his words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. "Add the cake to my order," he said. The room went quiet for a second. He wasn't used to being questioned, but her startled eyes met his with a mixture of gratitude and resistance. "Sir, no, please," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said simply, "but I want to." She looked at him like she wasn't sure whether to thank him or refuse again. He wasn't used to people hesitating when he offered something. Most were quick to accept, to flatter him, to say whatever he wanted to hear. But this woman, this stranger, looked almost embarrassed to be helped. There was strength in her humility, and he found it unexpectedly disarming. When the cashier handed the cake over, the boy's face lit up as if the world had just given him a miracle. "Thank you, mister," he said, his small voice full of sincerity. Alexander couldn't help but smile, a real one, the kind he hadn't felt in a long time. "You're welcome, kid," he replied quietly. "Happy birthday." The woman's eyes glistened, though she tried to hide it. She clutched the box tightly and whispered a thank you before leading her son toward the door. For a fleeting second, she turned back, her gaze meeting his again. It was brief, but there was something there, something unspoken. Then she was gone, and the bell above the bakery door chimed softly as it closed behind her. Alexander stood there longer than he meant to. He should have left right after, but he found himself staring at the door, replaying the moment in his mind. The simplicity of it all, the raw human honesty of that small interaction, had stirred something in him. He tried to shake it off as he left, but the image of the boy's smile followed him to his car. Back in his sleek black Mercedes, his driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked cautiously. Alexander nodded, though he wasn't sure why. "Yes," he said after a pause. "Just drive." The city blurred past the tinted windows, but his mind stayed in that bakery.
He thought about the woman's worn coat, the way she had tried to protect her pride, the way the boy had looked at her with so much love.
It reminded him of his own mother years ago, before everything had changed. She had been strong like that, determined, resilient, proud even when life gave her every reason not to be. He had built his empire for her once, but she was long gone now. Maybe that was why her memory ached so much that morning. By the time he reached his office, the weight of the city and business returned. His assistant met him in the lobby with files and updates, rattling off numbers and reports, but his mind wasn't in it. He kept thinking about the boy's voice saying thank you, the way the woman's eyes had shimmered with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. He told himself it didn't matter. He had done his good deed for the day, nothing more. Yet somehow it didn't feel that simple. Later that afternoon, while reviewing proposals, his assistant mentioned a community outreach program that one of his departments had been neglecting. "They're supposed to be helping families in need," she said. "But the last few months the reports haven't shown much progress." Alexander looked at the file for a long time before setting it down. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, he asked, "Do we have any openings there?" His assistant frowned. "Openings? As in staff?" "Yes," he said. "Find out if they need someone to help manage the local programs." It wasn't like him to get involved in the smaller branches of his corporation, but something in him wanted to. Maybe he wanted to remember that morning, to feel like he was still connected to people beyond the world of luxury and power. The next few days passed quickly, but the image of the woman and her son didn't fade. He had no idea who she was, and yet she lingered in his thoughts more than she should have. Meanwhile, across town, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the stranger who had paid for her son's cake. She replayed the moment again and again, his calm voice, the way he had looked at her, not with pity but with something else. She had never seen someone so composed, so effortlessly in control. It wasn't just his wealth she noticed. It was the quiet strength in his presence. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself it was just kindness, nothing more. But that night, as she tucked Noah into bed and watched him sleep with frosting still smudged on his cheek, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the man she would probably never see again. Yet, in ways neither of them knew, the world was already moving to bring them back together. Because for Alexander Carter, that morning had stirred something deeper than generosity. It had reawakened the part of him that remembered what it meant to care. And for Emily Dawson, the kindness of a stranger had planted a spark of hope in a heart that had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. A week passed before Emily saw the envelope. It was a quiet morning, gray and chilly, the kind where the air smelled faintly of rain and the city still seemed half asleep. She found it on her doorstep as she returned from her early shift at the diner, her shoes damp and her fingers numb from the cold. The envelope was plain but thick, her name written across it in neat handwriting. She frowned, her first thought being that it might be another bill. But when she picked it up, her breath caught. The paper was smooth, expensive, and the gold-embossed logo in the corner read Carter Industries. For a long moment she just stood there staring at it. She didn't know anyone from a company like that. She barely knew anyone outside her small circle of co-workers and neighbors. She tore it open carefully, her heart pounding with curiosity and a trace of fear. Inside was a simple card and a note. The card bore a name that made her blink twice to be sure she was reading it right. Alexander Carter, CEO, Carter Industries. And beneath it, written in the same elegant handwriting, was a single line that made her chest tighten. "You owe me nothing, but if you ever need a chance, call this number." She sank onto her worn couch, the letter trembling in her hands. A chance? What did that even mean? She remembered the man in the bakery, his calm expression, the quiet confidence in his voice, and those eyes that had seemed to see right through her without judgment. She had thanked him that day, but it hadn't felt enough. She had thought about him more than she wanted to admit. Not because he was rich or handsome, but because he had done something no one had done for her in years. He had noticed her, truly noticed her. The note sat on her kitchen table all day as she went about her usual routine, trying to convince herself to forget it. But every time she looked at it, her curiosity grew. Maybe he wanted to offer her something, help, perhaps, or charity. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She was proud of what little she had, even if it wasn't much. But something in the tone of his message felt different, sincere. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, she sat in the dim light of her kitchen staring at the number. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she picked up her phone and dialed. The line rang twice before a calm male voice answered. Alexander Carter. She froze for a moment, caught off guard by how direct he was. Hello, Mr. Carter, she said softly. This is Emily Dawson, from the bakery. There was a brief pause and then his voice warmed. Emily, I was hoping you'd call. I wasn't sure if I should, she admitted, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. I didn't want to bother you. You're not bothering me, he said. I meant what I wrote. I wanted to talk to you. She hesitated, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask.
May I ask why?
He chuckled lightly, the sound deep and measured. Because people like you are the reason I started what I do. You work hard, you keep going, and yet life never gives you a fair break. I run a foundation that helps single parents get back on their feet. And I think you'd be perfect to help me manage it. Me? She said in disbelief. I don't have a degree or experience in that kind of thing. I'm a waitress, not an executive. He paused before replying, his tone thoughtful. You have something most executives don't. You understand what struggle feels like. You know how to care. That's the kind of person I need. Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. With that kind of faith, that quiet conviction that she was capable of more than the world had let her believe. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, he said simply. Come in tomorrow morning. Meet me at the Carter Foundation office. We'll talk. She spent the rest of the night pacing, torn between fear and excitement. It felt impossible that a man like him would offer something like that to someone like her. And yet something deep inside told her to take the leap. The next morning she borrowed her neighbor's iron, pressed her best blouse, and pulled her hair into a neat bun. Noah hugged her before school, grinning. You look pretty, Mom, he said proudly. She smiled, trying to hide the nerves twisting inside her. The Carter Foundation office was nothing like the places she was used to. The glass doors gleamed and the marble floors shone under the soft morning light. She felt small walking through the lobby, clutching her old purse. But when she stepped into Alexander's office, the atmosphere shifted. He was standing by the window, his back to her, dressed in a dark gray suit that fit him perfectly. When he turned around, that same calm, steady expression greeted her. Emily, he said warmly. You came? I almost didn't, she admitted with a small laugh. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Then I'm glad you didn't listen to that voice, he replied. Please sit. They talked for nearly an hour. He explained that the foundation had grown too large for him to oversee personally, and he wanted someone with empathy and first-hand understanding to help guide its projects. He didn't ask for credentials, he asked about her life, her values, what she wanted for her son. And for the first time in years, someone listened to her without judgment or pity. When she left that day, she had a job offer and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into the work, learning fast, taking notes, and finding joy in helping others. The pay wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to breathe again, to buy groceries without counting every coin, to fix the broken heater in their apartment, to surprise Noah with small things he'd never expected. Alexander checked in often, offering guidance but never micromanaging. He watched her grow into the role with quiet admiration. What had begun as a gesture of kindness turned into something much deeper for him. He found excuses to visit her office, to ask about projects he already knew the answers to, just to hear her speak. There was something about the way she carried herself, with quiet dignity, never realizing how extraordinary she was. Emily, too, began to see him differently. Beneath his composed, almost distant exterior, she saw glimpses of someone kind, someone who had known loneliness even in his wealth. He would tell her stories about his mother, about growing up with little and fighting for everything he had. Sometimes he laughed, and in those moments he seemed almost human again, less like the untouchable billionaire everyone knew, and more like a man who simply wanted to belong somewhere. Their friendship grew naturally, almost unknowingly, built on shared moments that neither of them had planned. Late nights at the office turned into long conversations about life and dreams. Coffee breaks turned into quiet laughter over small jokes that no one else understood. And though neither spoke it aloud, something unspoken bloomed between them, a connection that felt fragile but undeniable. Yet beneath it all, Emily still carried a quiet fear. She knew how different their worlds were. He was power and perfection, the kind of man who appeared on magazine covers and business panels. She was a single mother from a tiny apartment, barely learning to believe in herself again. But every time she started to pull away, he would say something that made her stay. A reminder that he saw her not as someone beneath him, but as someone who mattered. Months passed and her life changed in ways she could never have imagined. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, fate had been kind for once. But deep down, Alexander knew something else was coming. A truth he hadn't told her yet. A part of his plan that could change everything between them. And as their connection deepened, he found himself wishing that the reason he had found her that day in the bakery had been pure coincidence, and not something written in the fine print of a secret he had been carrying for far too long. The sun was low and golden that evening, spilling soft light through the bakery windows. The same little shop where it had all begun a year earlier. The smell of frosting and warm bread filled the air, and laughter echoed between the walls. This time, the celebration was different. The tables were pushed together, covered in balloons, ribbons, and small plates of snacks that Emily had carefully arranged. A large chocolate cake sat proudly in the center. The words, "Happy 8th birthday," Noah written across the top in bright blue icing. For the first time in a long while, Emily wasn't worrying about the cost or the bills waiting at home. Today was about her son, about the joy in his eyes, and about how far they had come. Noah was running from one end of the bakery to the other, playing with his friends, his laughter as bright as the candles waiting to be lit. Emily stood nearby, her heart full as she watched him. He had grown taller, more confident. She couldn't believe that a year ago she'd been standing in this very place holding her breath over a cake she couldn't afford. She thought about that moment often, the way her world had shifted when a stranger had stepped forward and quietly paid for her son's happiness. That stranger, that billionaire, had somehow become the most unexpected and constant presence in her life. Alexander Carter arrived quietly, as he always did, not with the air of someone used to being noticed, but as a man who wanted to blend in, even though that was impossible for him. He carried a small gift bag in one hand, and a warm smile that softened the edges of his usually reserved demeanor. When Noah spotted him, his eyes lit up. "Hey, it's the cake man," he shouted, running over and wrapping his arms around Alexander's leg. The room burst into laughter, and even Emily couldn't help but join in, covering her face to hide the grin that refused to leave. Alexander knelt down, meeting the boy's eyes. "Cake man, huh? I think I like that better than CEO," he said, handing him the gift bag. "Something for you, champ. Open it after the candles, all right?" Noah nodded enthusiastically, his fingers twitching with curiosity. As Alexander stood up, his gaze found Emily's across the room. For a moment, the noise faded around them. Her eyes, warm and steady, met his with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something neither of them dared to name. She moved toward him, brushing her hair back nervously. "You made it," she said softly. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. "I like seeing happy endings." She smiled at that a little shyly. "I don't know if this is an ending," she said. "Feels more like a beginning." He watched her for a long moment, as though trying to memorize the way her face looked in the soft light. "You're right," he said finally. "It is." They stood side by side as Noah blew out his candles, his cheeks puffed, his eyes squeezed shut in concentration. Everyone clapped and cheered, and Emily's heart swelled with love so fierce it almost hurt. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. And so much of that had started with him, the man beside her who had stepped into her life without warning and changed everything. After the cake had been served and the children had Alexander finally approached her. He had been carrying something in his pocket all day, the weight of it reminding him of the decision he had made weeks ago. "You did a great job," he said, his voice softer than usual. "This is perfect." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You've done so much for us, Alexander. I don't even know how to thank you anymore." He smiled faintly. "You already have. You just don't know it yet." She frowned slightly, confused, but before she could ask, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught the moment she saw it. He didn't drop to one knee, not yet. Instead, he held it between them, his thumb brushing over the top as he took a steady breath. "Emily," he began, his voice low and sincere. "When I met you in this bakery, I thought I was doing a good thing. I thought I was helping someone, but I didn't realize that moment would change me. You and Noah. You reminded me what it means to care without expecting anything in return. You brought me back to a part of myself I thought I'd lost a long time ago." She felt tears pricking her eyes before she could stop them. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling. He opened the box slowly. Inside, the diamond caught the warm light and shimmered like a promise. "I'm not asking out of charity, Emily," he said. "I'm asking because I don't want to spend another day without you or Noah. You've already built a home in my heart. I just want to make it official." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She stared at him, at the ring, at the man who had stepped into her life when she had nothing to offer but gratitude. She thought of all the nights she had lain awake wondering how someone like him could care about someone like her. And now, as he stood before her with hope in his eyes, all she could think of was how right it felt. How inevitable it had always been. Noah ran up just then, breathless and grinning. "What's happening, Mom?" he asked, looking between them. Alexander glanced at him and smiled softly. "Well, buddy, I was just asking your mom something important." Noah's eyes widened with excitement. "Are you going to marry her?" he asked bluntly. The adults nearby laughed and Emily covered her face, blushing furiously. Alexander chuckled, lowering himself to Noah's height. "Only if she says yes," he said, looking up at Emily with that quiet intensity she could never look away from. The bakery fell silent for just a moment. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Yes," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Noah cheered so loudly that everyone in the bakery joined in, clapping and laughing. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a brief, perfect second, everything else faded. The struggles, the past, the doubts. All that remained was warmth, light, and the feeling that they had both finally found where they belonged. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the bakery had quieted, Emily stood outside under the streetlight, the ring glinting faintly on her finger. Alexander joined her, his coat draped over her shoulders to keep her warm. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "The first one, when we met." He nodded. "Every day," he said. "It reminded me that the smallest choices can change everything." She smiled, leaning into him, her head resting against his chest. "I used to think that day was just a miracle for Noah," she murmured. "But it was one for me too." He wrapped his arm around her, his voice low against her hair. "It was a miracle for both of us." The city lights shimmered in the distance, the night air calm and full of promise. Emily closed her eyes, feeling his heartbeat under her hand, and realized that the life she once thought impossible was now real and right in front of her. 1 year ago, a stranger had bought her son a birthday cake. Tonight, that same man had given her something far sweeter, a future. And for the first time in a long time, Emily Dawson believed she truly deserved it.